To overcome the wiles of the devil is going to take a warrior's mentality. You know, to even come to this conclusion, you're going to have to realize we're in this world, we are in a spiritual battle, and that we do have an adversary. Um, Took me almost 48 years, and I didn't even realize I had the warrior mentality until I was in federal prison. So it's not going to come overnight. Um, the word wiles is just a fancy way to say tricks, schemes, or strategies that the devil uses to keep people in bondage. Um, that there's a reason why I chose the word wiles, and it's only because of my book title, which is called Exposing the Wiles of the Devil, which I have not published yet. I also have another book called Checkmate. There's only one more move with Jesus. But wiles is a word that, excuse me, that the King James uses for tricks and schemes and strategies, and it's like the only translation that uses that word. And to have a catchy title, I thought I would utilize it. So that's all it really is. But to overcome these wiles is going to take the grit and determination of a warrior, because we're going to have to go through some things, and because the devil's going to hurl everything that he has at us to keep us from walking in true freedom. Having said that, I know what it's like to grind. It's not it wouldn't be unlikely to call me a warrior by the world's definition. I'm almost 6'3". I'm 210 pounds, and I have a very low fat percentage of my body. I'm in the top 2% of my age group. I'm 50 years old. Um, I work a job that requires me to put my life on the line in many situations. I know the dangers of working in an underground coal mine. I'm 600 feet below the surface, often in adverse conditions. And yet, I know how to go under unsupported roof and install pieces of rebar that are called roof bolts to safely reinforce the roof so that others can walk under it after we're finished. I know what to do when there's a roof fall. I know how to put the proper materials in to safely support that roof so that other people don't get hurt. I know how to avoid collisions with heavy equipment, because there's big, heavy equipment that haul lots of coal and there's not a lot of room. So there's always a danger of being crushed. Um, we have very high voltage systems uh, underground, and a person can easily be shocked if they don't know what they're doing, or if they don't pay attention to where they put their hands. Sometimes we get explosive concentrations of methane. Anytime methane gets into a concentration between 5 and 15%, it is highly explosive, and that could put many people at risk if you don't know how to do that. And fortunately, I know how to ventilate a mine and to get that methane safely evacuated out of there. I've been injured on more than one occasion. Actually, yesterday was my first day on workman's comp. I was hanging a heavy cable and my elbow popped, and they likely believe I have torn a tendon in my elbow. And so this is not my first lost time accident. I also had another one whenever I tripped over a pile of rocks and I tore the ligament in my ankle that required surgery. I had to have some hernia surgery. I almost had my ear torn off one time when I hit a piece of metal. It's called a chain hanger, and had to get 13 stitches, 10 of them on the inside of my ear. And let me tell you, That is not a pleasant experience. I actually worked the whole shift, and then I come out, and then I got my ear stitched up after that. And I've had more cuts and bruises, and I've got more scars than I care to even try to consider. Um, I've also come face to face with death in the mine on more than one occasion. I talked to a guy on my way out after a shift, only to have him crushed by a rock before I ever even made it outside. He was actually my first boss underground. He was the head of what we called the shovel crew. What they did was they went around and shoveled the excess accumulations of rock and coal that sometimes would spill off the belts. And they sent the new people to do that job to see if they could hack it in this tough environment. This poor guy had a fiance who had lost a previous fiance to death as well. So that's a very sad situation. I've held the head of a man who was taking his last breaths after he had gotten crushed by a continuous miner. He had a compound fracture in his arm, and he ended up passing away on the way out when they tried to get him help. He had 7 kids. It was actually the first time he'd ever been on our unit. He was actually in the other mine. We had 2 mines at that place, and they needed him because we were short-handed. I'd never talked to him before. I had seen him outside playing cornhole, and he was such a happy, carefree, fun-loving guy that was my impression of him. So, and just to see him die in that manner was heartbreaking. You know? Even the ride on the elevator shaft into the mine carried the heavy weight of death upon it. 3 men from the contracting company that were paid to construct this shaft for us were inspecting it one final time before they were going to release it to us. And they got into a bucket, and it was tied off, and the bucket tipped, and it made these guys fall 500 feet to their death. And sadly, one of the guys who died was an engineer, and his father had tragically died in a mine explosion in Kentucky. And he decided he would never work underground, but yet he suffered a very similar fate himself, as fate would have it. You know, with stakes that high, things like how clean you are quickly become irrelevant. You don't even pay attention to those things. You know, every single day I come out of the mine with a dirty face, and on most days I'm filthy from head to toe from a hard, sweaty day's work. But despite my physical prowess, my ability to work under those threats of death, that's the world's definition of a warrior. In this spiritual battle, that's not going to cut it. This kind of battle can only be won by a kingdom warrior. It's refusing to give up. The Bible calls it abiding or enduring. It's the spirit that gets back up no matter how many times it gets knocked back down. You go back out there, you dust yourself off, you refuse to quit, and you try again. The warrior mentality takes a former liability and turns it into an asset. Through the grace of my Lord Jesus Christ, I took the obsession / compulsion to use drugs, which had basically ruined my life, and made it work for my good. You know, because as Romans 8:28 would say, for we know he works all things to the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. To remain free from the bondage of addiction, I have to go to the same extremes to stay clean that I had to get high. But the warrior spirit is going to raise those stakes. It's going to take the same ingenuity and resourcefulness that caused my downfall and make it work for my good. That, my friends, is the ultimate fulfillment of Romans 8:28. I've made a lot of bad choices and they've cost me very dearly. And some of those choices have cost me my freedom. One in particular led me to being arrested by the DEA and serving time in a federal prison. You know, when a DEA officer tells you you're facing so many years and blah, 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 uh, a warrior spirit refuses to let that define your life. There was something whispering in my ear, that's not true. That's not going to happen. Don't believe that for a second. It's when all odds are against you, it's something that tells you there's still hope. That's a warrior spirit. It's not going to give in no matter what. You don't give up, you don't fold. You look at the situation, and no matter what the situation, the odds are stacked against you. It's impossible to say, I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to see this all the way through. I'm not going to give up yet. That's the warrior mentality. You know, I didn't realize it at the time, but I already had that warrior mentality deep inside me. And I did not unlock it until I was in federal prison. I actually read this book by David Goggins called Can't Hurt Me. And what I learned is that the body is subject to the mind, and the body is capable of so much more than what we even realize. One part in particular that really led me to what I call a circular moment of clarity. David Goggins' biggest fear was swimming. And to be a Navy SEAL, you have to undergo this thing called Hell Week, and they put you under all these challenges. And there's a bell that people have to go ring it when they give up, and they just say, I can't do it, it's too hard. It's called Hell Week. And so one of his requirements to go through Hell Week, obviously you have to be a good swimmer to be a Navy SEAL. And they had a pool exercise where he had to hold his breath for so long, and he was under there and he was freaking out and he was running out of breath, and his instructor was mocking him as he was holding his breath with ease, and he thought he was going to pass out, and he just went to this place in his mind, and he became empowered, and he was able to finish the rest of his challenges. And his instructor, who was mocking him, was even pointing upward at the pool like, hey, we got to go, I'm running out of breath. And David Goggins just stayed down there. It seemed to defy all odds. And I don't know why, but when I realized that the mind is in control of so much more of our body and things that happen in our lives, it opened up a door to me that I had never seen before. It allowed me to transform my workouts, to transform my body, to make it subject to my mind. And, I was doing little 1 hour workout sessions, and I was running maybe 2 or 3 miles, and those turned into 3-4 hour workout sessions. I was doing 1,000 push-ups at a time. I was doing 200 pull-ups, 300 dips, 2 hour ab workouts, and I was running up to 12 miles in one day. And, I'd already made up my mind that I was going to be the best inmate that I could possibly be and live out 1 Corinthians 10:31, which says, whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So I was going to be the best inmate, the best RDAP participant. I was going to be the best father, the best son, the best everything I could possibly be, the best welder, the best disciple. And so then I used that in my body as well, reading this book. And when I get out of prison, I decide to apply this to my life. So like when I don't feel like it, I go to work when I'm tired. I'm almost 50 years old and I'm doing a job that is probably reserved for most 20-year-olds. And I'm able to do it, even though oftentimes I'll wake up and I'm tired. Um, it's going to the gym when my muscles are sore. It's going out to see my kids on 4 hours sleep. I work out, I go to work overtime, and still make time to go see them. It's putting on a catcher's mitt and taking lumps so that you can help your son develop his 80-mile-an-hour fastball. It's being there for your daughter as she's trying to understand peer pressure and trying to make her way through teenage life. As we all know, that's quite the challenge. You know, the warrior mentality does not quit, as I've already said. It is not a passive participant. Life is an active sport, and you have to have that warrior mentality. You have to get up in life and you have to live it. The kingdom warrior does not run from the problems of this world. He or she faces them head on and comes out stronger, even if there are scars from the battle. You know, that's why I'm talking to you right now. You don't realize it, or you may not realize it, but you have that same warrior spirit, same warrior mentality deep inside you. You just haven't learned to unlock it. And that's where I come in. Not only do I possess this warrior mentality, it gives me the motivation to push through the chaos. I also have another side of my persona that allows me to map out the strategy to achieve victory. I call this my scholar persona. You see, the warrior handles the physical grit, but the scholar masters the spiritual warfare. The warrior is going to rush in headlong without a plan and get caught in situations and the tricks and schemes. The scholar is going to analyze the strategies and come up with a tactical battle plan. To overcome those wiles of the devil that I talked about, you got to know this strategy. I went through the fire. I've done the heavy lifting. I've mapped out the playbook so that you don't have to stumble through the dark all by yourself. What I have uncovered in my research will help not only the addict, but anybody who is in bondage to some sin. So, if this strikes you as something you might be interested in, I highly encourage you to tune in for part 2 called The Scholar.